What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of 30 in 30, and today we're going to talk about ways to progress your training. I feel like a lot of us, for the most part, at the beginning of our training careers, we have no limit to our strength and to our progression. As that time goes along, our progress starts to slow. Some of us quit, others get a little bit more frustrated. We still keep at it, but we definitely notice that progress slows down over time. And those of us who figure out ways to help progress our training, obviously are going to make more progress in the long run. So today, we're going to talk about ways to progress your training. Some of these I know a lot of you are already familiar with, but it's nice to have a good refresher on ways that we can implement different training styles. So the easiest one to help progress training is just increase total volume. So what is total volume? Total volume, is sets and reps, essentially, what it comes down to. So we could either do more sets or more reps. As I've talked about in previous videos, we necessarily don't want to do all the reps in the world, so it's really sets times reps. So instead of doing 4 sets, we could do 5 or 6 sets to help increase the total volume, holding the reps the same. That's one way of doing it. Probably the easiest way of doing it. Another way to progress your workout is obviously adding a little bit more weight. Now, I know that may sound like a no-brainer to some people, but I see it all the time in the gym, unfortunately. Guys come in, they do 225 on the bench press for a few. They do 275 for a couple. They do 315 for a struggling 1 or 2. They call it a day. I see them a few days later, 225, 275, 315, done. And that's it. And they don't ever make progression. So obviously another way to progress is adding a few pounds at a time. I've talked about in previous videos about slowly building your intake. Well, it's like I said before, it's very similar to progressing yourself in the gym. You have to slowly add weight over time. Even if you're adding 2.5 pounds or 5 pounds to a certain lift, that's great. And especially if you keep doing that over the weeks and over the years, you're going to get stronger. Now, some exercises you will be able to progress more on than others. So for example, my lateral raise personal record hasn't changed much in my training career. I'm still topping out at about 30 to 35 pounds for a set of 15 because I'm not swinging, I'm keeping good form. So that's not necessarily going to change, as opposed to a larger movement. Let's say like my deadlift. My deadlift has changed a lot over my training career because I've slowly added weight to it. So adding weight, kind of a no-brainer. A lot of us already do it, but for those of you who are just kind of starting out, don't be afraid to nickel and dime your way up, to use progressive overload to progress your workouts. What's up next? That can be many things. You could start with frequency. So that's, instead of lifting legs once per week, you do it twice per week. That's a way to progress your overall progress. Now, if you're already training everything twice per week, then you could change your intensity of those given sessions. So instead of doing the same rep ranges, you could take a session where you just lift heavy weights, so that may be a little bit more intense session, and then you have a high rep session week to week, in between your weeks if you're already training it twice. So that's frequency and intensity. Some other things that you could work on is tempo during your individual training session. So are you using proper tension when you're training? So for example, some weeks when I leg press, I don't let the sled hit all the way down on the stoppers and then push back up. Sometimes I do tempo sets where I push down, don't let it hit the stoppers, constant tension back and forth. So I'm doing a 1 count and about a 2 count down, a 1 count, 2 count down. And that's another way to help keep tension on the muscle, once again to help progression. Besides that, some other things that you could use are putting your exercises in a different order. So I started doing this semi-recently. So instead of always coming in fresh and deadlifting first, because obviously you're at your most powerful, why not move your deadlift second, third, or even last? It's just a new way to progress. And then you could start, because obviously you're a little bit more fatigued before, and then you could start working your weights back up. Obviously, I would encourage you guys to rearrange your exercises according to, how you feel best. If you put your deadlifts last and you feel like you might be a little bit more injury prone, that's okay. You can always move them second. Personally, that's what I do. So I always do one movement first. I do a kind of a barbell row, a Smith machine row first, and then I deadlift. So it fatigues me a little bit, but then I'm still feeling okay to deadlift. And another way that you could obviously progress your training programs is just swapping out the exercises or the muscle groups that you're doing on a daily basis. So you don't necessarily need to train back and buys together. You don't necessarily need to train chest and shoulders together. Feel free to mix those around. Now, I've personally run a push-pull leg split for about 2 years now, but that's because of things like I mentioned before, like my back, being a little bit injured. My joints don't handle multiple pressing sessions a week too well, so I have to limit the amount of pressing. So I found that that's what works best for me. So I've used these other tools about increasing my frequency, increasing my total volume, doing some tempo sets, decreasing even the rest time on certain exercises will help you progress yourself. So you can do things like training to failure or doing supersets and stuff like that. I personally don't do those things. I don't necessarily like training to failure. You can count that in the intensity one. I'm all for just having different kind of weight training sessions during the week, and the intensity will follow. Granted, you should bring a high level of intensity to every training session, but splitting it up into different rep ranges is a good way to constantly progress. So as always, guys, thanks for tuning in. Remember to make slow changes to your weight training sessions in order for constant progress. Tune in for tomorrow's video for another 30 and 30. I'll see you then.